without further ado, I'd like to begin by inviting our first senior co-host, our Vice President for Infrastructure at the World Bank, Maktar Diop. Since 2018, he has led the Infrastructure Vice Presidency, which covers the major lending areas of energy, transport, digital development, and infrastructure finance. Prior to that, he served for 6 years as our Vice President for the Africa region, and previously Country Director for major clients such as Brazil and Kenya. He also has first-hand experience of government when he was Minister of Economy and Finance in his native country of Senegal during the 1980s. So without further ado, Maktar, please, over to you for your welcoming remarks.
So good morning, Vivian, and good morning, everybody. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second edition of the Infra4Dev conference. This year, we are delighted to partner with Berkeley. We work very closely with Ted, Miguel, and his team at SEGA to organize this conference on decarbonization. Decarbonizing infrastructure, as we know, is a major issue today. And I would like to thank really the SEGA team for their fantastic work and strong commitment to make this conference happen. And in the current condition, we know that it's a big challenge. I would like to thank Vivian Foster, the Chief Economist for the World Bank, for leading on our side the organization of this conference. Time has changed. Last year, we were in Toulouse discussing regulation as a digital age, and Jean Tirole keynote address was done in a totally different context. We get in planes, we went in nice weather, and today we are talking virtually. The World Bank has a long-standing tradition of collaboration with academics from Berkeley. When I was a VP in Africa, for Africa, we organized in 2015 our annual conference here on the theme confronting conflict and fragility in Africa. And I remember that my friend Ted was telling us in his keynote address that climate change affects conflict. As we are today discussing decarbonizing infrastructure, we are not only talking about reducing emission, but at the end of the day, we are trying to reduce conflict. We're also trying to address the health challenges. At this time of COVID-19, many people are dying from preconditions linked to CO2 emissions. So our discussion is broader than just a technical discussion about energy. I also remember with great pleasure our excellent joint work on the economic impact of intervention in Kenya many years ago. And with Catherine Wolfram, and we are thrilled to have her as one of our keynote speakers. So this is a wonderful time or opportunity to talk about what has been driving the work of a lot of people here, and particularly our keynote speakers. Climate change is a defining challenge for our time. We know that if we want to keep the global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees, we need to reach zero emission by 2050. The battle against climate change will be lost or won in developing countries and emerging economies. Actually, emerging markets and developing economy already account for over 70% of total emissions. Moreover, their emissions continue to grow rapidly. So we have a challenge. They represent a lot and they're growing fast. Infrastructure in that context is a major contributor to carbon emissions. In fact, the energy and transport sector account for over half of the global emissions. While there have been encouraging progress in the energy sector, the decarbonization of transport lags far behind and has yet to become a major focus for policymakers and development partners, especially in developing and emerging economies. Not so long ago, energy emissions seems to be spiraling out of control, while developing and developed countries were locked in a debate regarding who should bear the cost of clean energy. Fast forward, 10 years later, the energy outlook seems quite hopeful. And technology has played a critical role. Thanks to technological change, the cost of renewable energy has decreased drastically, with solar PV prices declining by over 80% in 2010 and 2019. This is a huge breakthrough. And I think that what we have done together have contributed in helping in accelerating that process. I want to just give you a quick anecdote. When I was appointed Vice President for Africa in 2012, the average cost of solar in Africa was over 20 cents kilowatt. When I left, the last auction was giving us 3 cents per kilowatt without batteries. And if we added battery, we were reaching 7 to 9 cents a kilowatt. So huge progress on prices. In most situations, now we have seen because of that solar PV is competing with conventional sources and will become even more competitive as the cost of storage comes down. Now we are looking also of onshore, of offshore wind that are also not far behind. And we have a colleague from the UK will certainly tell us more about what the UK has been doing, particularly on offshore wind, as they've been leading on that front. Today, countries no longer need to be convinced that clean energy is in their national interest. Even without talking about climate change and without taking it into account, countries realize that it's effective to use renewable energy. Renewable sources are playing a key role in the energy transition of the power sector, which saw CO2 emission decline by 1.2% in 2019. But the rapid deployment of the solar PV is showing the difference between this brave world, the brave new world, and the old world of electricity pricing. Providing an efficient price signal for rooftop solar has proved to be a major challenge. This increased use of variable renewable energy raises a number of pricing and regulatory issues that academics are today studying. The regulators that will be joining us in this conversation today as practitioners will certainly give us some insights on the challenges they are facing in addressing this complex and difficult issue. Lastly, let's make sure that the efficiency agenda is not an afterthought in the energy discussion in developing countries. We need to continue working on building standards. We need to continue working on cooling, which is a huge source of emissions. Let me turn now to the transport sector, which has yet to experience this kind of turnaround. I would like to take this opportunity to indicate that we are planning to strengthen our partnership with the Institute of Transport Studies here at Berkeley. We hope that we'll be able to work with them around the decarbonizing transport agenda, which is a priority in our agenda at the World Bank, but also on issues like road safety, which is important. Global transport emission went up by 0.5% in 2019, which is an improvement from the past. However, emissions from aviation and shipping are rising rapidly, and global road transport emissions continue to increase as people across North America, Europe, Asia are buying larger and heavier vehicles. Moreover, when it comes to decarbonization, transport is a far more complicated sector. In contrast to energy, transport is highly decentralized. It has a wide range of actors across many modes of transportation. Coordination is a challenge. Secondly, the nature of the demand and its patterns make it harder to manage it proactively. Third, in contrast to energy, transport lacks a strong planning tradition that we had in government that would allow an integrated least cost approach to develop the system on a multimodal basis. Fourth, in contrast to energy, technological adoption and innovation in sectors linked to transport and that have a direct impact on decarbonization has been constrained by price, and also has been constrained by consumer preferences. So there is a lot of work to do on the behavior issue, behavioral economics on this, but also to look at pricing and technological adoption. In recent years, the World Bank has adopted what we call an avoid, shift, and improve framework to guide our efforts to decarbonize transport. Avoid is what is trying to manage transport demand at source and recognizes the influence of urbanization trend. Shift means it's about, more importantly, moving as much demand as possible to lower carbon modes, moving passenger to public transport and freight to railways. Improve means reducing the carbon intensity of motorized transport. And we can do it by doing a lot of things, improving the fuel efficiency of cars, avoiding trucks that are driving around empty. But on top of these three levels, our efforts are focused a lot on fossil fuel subsidies. Fossil fuel subsidies reform are complex and are very much linked to the political economy of countries. Finally, the digitalization of transport could be an additional tool if policymakers manage to leverage it properly. Fortunately, the decarbonization trajectories of transport and energy are interconnected. We cannot look at them separately. The electrification of vehicles means that the greening of the power mix will ultimately lead to cleaner passenger mobility. We're seeing it in California. Moreover, the use of electricity to produce hydrogen fuel will enable decarbonization benefit in the heavy-duty vehicle sector. It starts happening in the Nordic countries in Europe. But we need to ensure that the decarbonization of infrastructure is just a transition. We cannot let this transition perpetuate the existing set of winners and losers. We need to address the concern of stranded workers and communities. We cannot enforce a one-size-fits-all approach. We need to give a seat at the table to a wider range of stakeholders who will help us design equitable transition plans. A lot has been done, but much remains to be worked out, which is why we need these conferences, and we need many conferences of this nature to ensure that development practitioners can benefit from cutting-edge thinking in academia. At the same time, we need to ensure that the contribution of academic researchers will help us find the distinctive solution and challenges that we are trying to address in infrastructure development in developing countries. I see this conference as a great way to prepare us to that task, and the frontier topics that we'll be discussing, and my friend Ted Miguel, Michael, Catherine, and all colleagues will be discussing it today, will help us preparing for the COP26 in Glasgow next year. And we need at this conference to make sure that we remain on track to achieve our decarbonization targets in energy by 2030, despite COVID-19. We will need to ensure that decarbonization of transport to look like in large cities that are dominated by second-hand cars and informal public sectors. In the countries that we know quite well, Kenya, this is what we call matatus. What do we do about it? How do we best prepare for the growing demand for cooling in emerging markets and developing economies? How do we decarbonize a highly inefficient trucking sector that is operating with an aging fleet? These are some questions that we have in mind, and we are counting on you academics to help us think through in combination with policymakers and be able to discuss it and take it forward. So today, I'm very happy to have this group of leading researchers and great practitioners. We will come with their experience and their ideas to help us take it to the next level. Sorry for being a little bit long, but I wanted just to set the scene from the World Bank and thank all of you for joining us. Thank you. Back to you, Vivian.
Thank you so much, Maktar, for setting the stage for us with those opening remarks. I'd now like to turn to Ted Miguel, our other co-host. Ted Miguel is the Oxfam Professor of Environmental and Resource Economics at UC Berkeley, as well as a director and co-founder for the Center for Effective Global Action. Ted holds a PhD in economics from Harvard. He's been visiting professors at Princeton and Yale, as well as a faculty research associate of the National Bureau of Economic Research. And Ted's career has really focused on the whole development agenda in the African continent. So Ted, we're delighted to have you with us. Over to you for your welcoming remarks.
Thanks so much, Vivian. It's such a pleasure to be here and be able to co-host this event with partners at the World Bank and beyond. And in particular, a great pleasure to work together with Mokhtar and his team. As he noted, we have a great tradition now of collaboration with the World Bank. The 2015 conference on Africa that Mokhtar mentioned was really productive, and I hope we can achieve something similar here today. And again, Mokhtar and I have worked together going back to work on health and education and energy in Kenya, many years ago. So it's really just a pleasure to be collaborating and really to be able to help organize this great event. The Center for Effective Global Action here at Berkeley is a center with over 120 faculty affiliates at this point, and many other graduate students and undergraduate researchers focused on the challenge of global poverty and addressing global poverty. One of the things that sets us apart is the multi-sectoral nature of the center. There are, of course, economists like myself in the center, but also computer scientists, climate scientists, political scientists, psychologists, agriculture specialists in the center. And I think today is just a perfect day to bring together the SIGA network and colleagues at the World Bank when we face a challenge like energy and infrastructure that really needs to draw on expertise in many different fields. So this is really a special opportunity for us to collaborate. Our focus ultimately, of course, is on the social and economic well-being of low-income populations around the world. And so many of those populations today are threatened by climate change. In a world with more flooding and droughts and extreme temperatures, livelihoods will be threatened. And this is a challenge that isn't going away. It's just accelerating right now. My own research has focused on the link, as Mokhtar mentioned, on the link between extreme climate and violent conflict, both at the sort of national scale as well as more low-level conflict and crime. It turns out when ecosystems are disrupted, when temperatures are extreme, human society is really stressed to the breaking point. These are issues that we need to have in mind when we're discussing the challenges of energy and infrastructure. I think in today's conference, we'll be focusing on methods, we'll be focusing on frontier topics, frontier types of data and policy questions, but let us never lose sight of the fact that these issues are important precisely because they'll ultimately affect the lives of the poorest around the world in profound ways. Today, one of our keynote speakers, Solomon Xiang, is a co-author of mine on some of that work linking climate to conflict. He's done other work examining the broader economic impacts of climate change. And today, Saul will actually share with us some new research of his on cutting edge methods to use data from satellites, remote sensing data, combined with machine learning tools in order to create the measures and the data that we need in this space. So I think this is a very exciting opportunity for all of us to learn about the latest methods and think about how to put them into practice to deal with the challenges that we face. Mokhtar just made the case very persuasively that infrastructure is a really important piece of the puzzle, and transport infrastructure is an area where we've made too little progress in decarbonization. Such a large share of global CO2 emissions are coming from the transport sector. And although till now, low and middle income countries have contributed relatively little to global CO2 emissions, that's changing very rapidly as poorer countries grow around the world. So we really need to put in place the right type of infrastructure now to avoid the future that we all dread in terms of climate change. This is going to necessitate an immediate shift towards renewable energy, the development of improved battery technologies, and dramatic improvements in energy efficiency in many different sectors. I think, again, what's very exciting about the session today is you'll hear about research, from researchers and policymakers about progress in many of these different dimensions, and how, of course, the challenge of how we can accommodate the adoption of these new technologies while maintaining economic growth is going to be a major topic for policymakers and researchers going forward. I want to discuss this challenge of adopting new technology in developing countries just by discussing briefly some of my own work in this area, together with Kenneth Lee of UChicago and Catherine Wolfram, one of our keynote speakers today. We've been working in Kenya to understand the energy sector in rural areas. The energy sector in rural Kenya, other parts of rural Africa, is evolving very rapidly. There's been the expansion of the grid, development of new solar technologies, and it's just been an incredibly dynamic space. In some of our work, we found some surprising findings, and I think this really highlights the importance of bringing social scientists and engineers and policymakers together in this area. We found that the expansion of the grid in rural Kenya didn't necessarily translate into socioeconomic gains for poor households in rural areas. Grid connections were really just the beginning. So many poor households that received a grid connection still couldn't afford the appliances that they needed in order to harness power. So technology alone wasn't enough. At the same time, there's been research showing that the deployment of some new solar technologies in rural settings also wasn't enough to improve children's schooling or other outcomes. Human behavior was an element that was missing in some of the engineering analysis. The technology alone wasn't enough. We needed to bring human behavior and social science really into the mix in order to understand how technologies would be used. And I think that's exactly why I'm so excited about the conference today. It's such a rare opportunity to bring together leading thinkers in the policy space, in the social science, economic, and business space, and engineers and technologists together in one place, all focused on the same challenge. And really one of the most important challenges facing humanity today. So this is a really rare opportunity for us and an exciting one to make progress by bringing our insights together in a collaborative way to understand the transport sector, the energy sector, the water sector, to think about the new types of data that are now available that'll allow us to make progress in this area, and the new statistical methods like the machine learning tools I mentioned before that can accelerate progress. So before I go on for too long, let me just close with two brief thoughts. And these are echoing Mokhtar's comments. First, every crisis is a potential opportunity. We are in the midst of the COVID pandemic. I think we would all have loved for this conference to be in DC or in California where we could all be together. Of course, that isn't possible now. But this pandemic, with all of its challenges, also may give us an interesting view into what a lower carbon world might look like. Recent research by SIGA affiliates has documented how the drop in CO2 emissions as a result of the pandemic, especially in the early stages of the pandemic, may have had benefits for human health. I think all of us have been rethinking the nature of our work, our commute, our travel, our energy use during the pandemic. Which of these lessons can we bring forward and incorporate into policy when the pandemic ends to make for a better world? I think this is a point that we should keep in mind, that maybe we can take advantage of this challenging time to make progress. My second point is I am actually feeling some optimism that the political winds may now be blowing in the right direction for further progress on all these issues we're discussing at a global scale. Most importantly, from where we sit now, the political change in the United States administration holds hope for renewed American leadership in this area, which would be very valuable in pushing for further change. Now may actually be the right time to invest seriously in a global Green New Deal. So I for one, am just very excited about that discussion in the panel later on today, and all the panels, to think about what the coming years could offer in terms of policy change and innovation. So just to wrap up, I want to thank all of you for joining us here today. I want to thank Makhtar and his colleagues at the World Bank, my colleagues at SIGA who have worked so hard to put this event together. And I hope that we can learn together and learn from each other as we have in the past. So with that, I look forward to turning over to Professor Michael Grubb, the Professor of Energy and Climate Change at University College London, for his thoughts. Thank you very much.